Well, Alabama had a big game this weekend, which means there were a lot of recruits there, and you might even say a tank load of recruits.
You are Locked On Bama, your daily podcast on the Alabama Crimson Tide, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back into Locked On Bama, AHSA's radio network. Luke Robinson, that's me. Bama Online's Jimmy Stein, that's him. Want to thank you everydayers for joining us every day and making us your first listen because y'all are the best. And also want to thank FanDuel for sponsoring this particular podcast. And Jimmy, we had a big game this weekend. I don't know how many people know it. I mean, Ryan Williams played well and Jalen Milroe played well. And
very few people watched it.
We've talked. I wonder what I got to look up the viewership when you're on a rant here.
I still haven't seen it, believe it or not. I mean, I also haven't gone out of my way to Google it. It's usually just thrown into our face, but I haven't seen it, but it's got to be a massive number.
Got to be. Even Serena Williams watched it, apparently, because she said that Ryan Williams was her cousin.
Hey, when you're
the same way Ashawn Robinson is my cousin, I'll let y'all know.
When you're claimed by Serena, that's pretty good.
That's a big deal. But, one of the bigger things that came out of it was the recruiting experience for so many kids. There were a ton of kids there, a lot of 2026 kids. And I know Bama Online has done a write-up on Caleb Cunningham, and you can talk about him as well as Tank Jones, who is the best player in Alabama for 2026 out of the Mobile area. And apparently Alabama does pretty well with these Mobile kids.
When you have that kind of environment and atmosphere, it pays huge dividends. Now, where I think people can be a little off here is I don't think it matters quite as much for the 25 kids. I think the hay is in the barn for almost all of them, even the uncommitted ones or the ones that could flip. I mean, they're down to one or two. And, I don't think the atmosphere environment of what happens Saturday night is going to affect those kids. They're already so far down the road with their decision, but it has a massive effect on the 26 and 27 kids that were there because this forms their opinion of schools. It forms their opinion of, okay, if I play here, what's it going to be like? And boy, just a home run. And let's also say, even though we do football recruiting here, of course, and basketball recruiting too, that the other programs on campus all had important recruiting weekends, and you had to know it helped them. It had to help tennis and softball and gymnastics and the swimming. All of those programs had kids in town too. And boy, that game was an Alabama infomercial. It really was.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. And, couple that with the news that Alabama's topped over 40,000 students now. I mean, well over 40,000. And Alabama's the place to be. I mean, there was a Twitter guy that is a college football guy that was, I need to find it before I just say, hey, some dude on Twitter said this, but he was apparently some college football dude that people actually follow. And he was like, he said, I went to Alabama this week, and he said, I don't understand how everybody is an Alabama fan. That's the most amazing thing I've ever been to in my life. And I think a lot of people are saying that. In fact, I thought it was funny. A lot of the recruits after the game, they had the exact same comment as if they were coached to say it. They all said that environment was crazy. That environment was crazy. That environment was crazy. And it's so true. And I feel like the fans have sort of been released from their cages a little bit. Look, we all love Nick Saban. Nobody's ever saying we don't. But there was a business-like approach to it that we emulated. And now we do have a little more freedom. And on top of that, this summer I was saying, hey, I'd like to see a little emotion out of Kalen DeBoer. Well, by God, he gave it to us on Saturday night.
It was a horrific missed call. Horrific, by the way.
It was god awful. But look, missed calls happen, and in the end we won, so I'm not going to sweat it. I mean, it's not as bad as the Minnesota-Michigan call that was made that should have been missed. But back to recruiting for a second. Another thing that came out of this was Alabama had some big basketball visitors, and Preston Murphy in true Carmen Sandiego fashion, has already released some kind of cryptic tweet late last night about how, boy, I don't remember what he actually said, but he put an Instagram post up, and it's like those cartoons he does where he's standing there and he's saying, I've already won 11-0 versus you know who, and the scoreboard's blue, and people are trying to decipher what is happening with that. We assume it means AJ Dybansta. Am I saying that right? Dybansta. Okay. Is maybe committing to Alabama, and the blue scoreboard equals BYU, and 11-0 means that he visits BYU on October 11th, but that's not going to matter. I don't know, but if AJ Dybansta commits to Alabama, good Lord, Katie, bar the door.
I don't even want to consider it, just because of how massive that would be. I don't want to be disappointed when he doesn't, because that's just so, it's just so far removed from my understanding of Alabama basketball my whole life that we could actually sign that kid. I mean, this kid is, I just, for those that don't know, I mean, he's not LeBron James. I'm not trying to say he's LeBron, but this is like LeBron. I mean, in terms of, there is one kid clearly better than all the other prospects in the country in his class that experts are saying is not only the best player in this cycle, he's the best player in several cycles. So, I mean, this is a transcendent number one prospect, not just this year's number one prospect. It's a transcendent number one prospect that is a slam dunk, to use a basketball term appropriately, to be a one and done guy and then the first pick in the NBA draft.
It would be unfair almost to have Ryan Williams and AJ on the same campus at the same time. I mean, holy cow. You talk about everything's a must watch. I mean, you got to get there for everything. I'm just going to have to quit work and just move to Tuscaloosa and just hang out. I mean, I can't miss a game anymore. I can't just watch him on TV. I'm going to have to actually be there. I mean,
wouldn't be surprising to find out Ryan's a pretty good basketball player. Would not be surprising.
Oh, I bet you Ryan's good at everything. There's nothing. I bet you Ryan's like, hey, Serena, why don't we just play a little tennis match and see what's up with that?
He got Harry Potter to quit Quidditch.
He was a 5-star Quidditch player. All right. So Caleb Cunningham also reaffirmed his commitment to Alabama. And he, look, how could he not? I mean, Caleb Cunningham is still going to go around and visit, even though he has no visits planned, according to the article on Bama Online. He has no visits planned, but I suspect he's just going to go where he can go because, again, we don't know this for sure, but we all hear the rumors. I'm sure people are incentivized to make some visits sometimes in various ways. I'm not saying it's all financial. It may be other reasons. And also, even if you weren't incentivized, you're incentivized by the way that they treat you when you get there, even if they don't necessarily give you anything tangible. You treated like a god. So
it's a fun trip.
It's a fun trip. I mean, look, when it's sort of like if anybody out there ever pledged a fraternity, when they were rushing you, everything was poops and giggles, right? And then, of course, you had to go through the pledgeship.
Sign on the dotted line, and the next thing you know,
it was a little less fun.
Yeah, you're headed to the goat farm.
You're hanging by the rafters with your fingertips and your pants around your ankles, and the next thing you hear is a bah, and you're like, "What is happening?"
Hey, boy, I think you described, SEC football there, but
maybe that was just my experience. I don't know. That's what's even worse.
That's the one you chose, but all right, whatever works for you. But
regardless.
No, I feel confident Caleb Cunningham's going to pick Alabama in the end. I mean, he's already committed to Alabama. What player committed to Alabama, went to that game Saturday night, watched the game, saw that environment and said, nah. But I'll tell you what, though, all these kids sound confident, in their quotes, and you watch them, they're great high school players. But, man, when you see the high level of play that's on that field, there is the kid out there, the rare kid that's like, I don't know that I can play here. I mean, that happens a lot more than y'all would think. I mean,
Okay.
question like, am I good enough to be here? I mean,
that's okay. And if then he doesn't need to be there, because this is nothing but big boy stuff.
That sometimes happens, and sometimes kids will bring that to coach. I've heard Coach Saban discuss it before, both publicly and not publicly. And I mean, Saban has to tell these kids, hey, have confidence in me. You're good enough, or I wouldn't have given you the spot, but it is football at the highest level. That's one thing I brought up today in a piece on BOL, Luke, is this is football at the second highest level in the world is SEC football. That might sound like, no, there's no way that's right, but I don't know. I mean, I only think the league better than the SEC is the NFL. I mean, that's the way I look at it. And I know when you're like, no, those Canadian, well, they're older, and they're all guys that could not play in the NFL, or they would be there because it pays a heck of a lot more. So most of the kids that are on the field for Alabama and Georgia are going to play in the NFL, not the CFL.
Okay. One of our better new sponsors. And look, if you want, now's the time to get on board. You want to be a part of the Alabama Crimson Tide for real, then you need to look into Roy. It's time to highlight my Roy Player of the Week. And I'm going to go with Jalen Milroe. I could easily go with Ryan Williams, but I'm going to go with Jalen Milroe.
Here on this Milroy now on this live read.
Now is Jalen Milroy. Roy is a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter the referral code Locked On, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. This week, we've selected Jalen Milroe because he did everything he needed to do, and he was SEC Player of the Week. He should be National Player of the Week, but I don't know that I've seen that yet. And you know what? I'm saying that Jalen Milroe needs to get some Roy money from all y'all out there, including me, and I'm going to give him some. I can tell you that. If you were impressed, as we were with his performance on Saturday, you can show him some love too. Just hop on Roy and throw in a few bucks. It doesn't have to be $100. It can be $5, $10, whatever. It adds up fast for Jalen Milroe and all the other players. Now you have the chance to show your appreciation for Milroe, for Williams, for Burnup, for whoever you want, and his standout performance this week, as well as whoever else you want to help with the Alabama Crimson Tide. Get off the sidelines and get into the NIL game with Roy. Support the players and change the game with Roy. I'm telling y'all, it's an easy app. Go get it and then help out Alabama, keep these dudes around, and let's go win a lot of championships. And let's do this together. Roy is such a good idea. I mean, and I'm telling you, I'm making a pledge. I'm passing along some money to via Roy to Milroe and Williams this week. I'm doing that personally. So Jimmy also doing it personally. By God.
Oh, okay, all right.
I'm guaranteeing Jimmy does it. I don't know.
Think about sending a few bucks to Carson Beck.
You may want to send him to Peyton Thorne. It sounds like he's having to get a lot of refunds, according to the story last week. Anyway, so the Big 10 and the SEC may be partnering up. I mean, Jimmy, you had to be Stevie Wonder in a snowstorm not to see this coming. I mean, this is happening where, look, I've already and I know Purdue's in the Big 10, but hear me out here. What I thought this past weekend, Purdue is just, I mean, they have no shot to compete anymore. So I don't know what their future necessarily is. I guess they'll stay in the Big 10, I guess. But I'm not trying to pick on Purdue. I'm just saying, they're firing Graham Harrell because the offense just can't do anything, because they can't compete, because they can't get players. Vanderbilt's going to be in the same boat. And, this thing is shaping up to where it's going to end up being about 40 teams, plus or minus, like we've talked about for a while now. It may be 60, it may be 32, but it's going to be so NFL-esque, it's not going to be recognizable. And the SEC and Big Ten are getting together and saying, look, here's the deal. All right, y'all want to have this playoff where we have 16 teams? Okay, we each get 4 bids, automatic, period, end of discussion. Now, I don't know if that limits them to 4. If I were the SEC, I'd be like, okay, no, we get 4 and we may get more. Now, an auto bid will go to the ACC if there's still an ACC, and an auto bid will go to the Big 12 if there's still a Big 12. And Notre Dame can work its way in, and maybe a group of 5 as long as there is a group of 5. But if I'm the SEC and the Big 10, I go, yeah, we are driving this train, y'all. We're bringing in the money. People pay to watch us. If Memphis and Appalachian State play, nobody's going to watch. I don't mean that as a shot at Memphis and Appalachian State. There's a place in this world for those schools and those schools to give scholarships to players who deserve it. But when Georgia and Alabama play, and I just tried to look up the ratings and they aren't out yet, those are the things that make money for college football. So, yeah, it makes sense to me. I'm not necessarily for it because, again, Jimmy, I've said this all along. I know where all this is headed, but I kind of like Alabama to play Mercer. And the reason is because that way a family that doesn't necessarily get to afford to go to Alabama, Georgia, even as cheap as the prices on Game Time were, or a family that doesn't know people. You know, I was very fortunate. I mean, my wife knows somebody who happens to have a skybox, and we happen to do business with them too. And they invited us last second. And I was just very fortunate, or I wouldn't have gone. I mean, I was just very fortunate. I mean, I just had a good friend that was very nice to me, and I appreciate it. But not everybody has that. So there's a place for Alabama Mercer and Auburn, Alabama A&M, so that families can go and experience things that everybody else may take for granted. But that's going away. And if it's going to go away, let's just go ahead and pull the Band-Aid off. And the Big 10 and the SEC are saying, yeah, and we're going to pull the Band-Aid off, and y'all better have some Neosporin because it's going to hurt.
I think the SEC and Big 10 have to be very careful. I mean, there's no question who controls college football right now, and that's the SEC and the Big 10 sort of jointly. So they're the 2 biggest boys on the block are going to form I don't want to use the word alliance because that was used before when it comes to this sort of stuff. And it's not that. It's a recognition or an acknowledgement that, hey, we hold all the cards, and they do. The SEC and the Big 10 hold all the cards. They are in a position to dictate to the rest. This is how the playoff format's going to be going forward. And if y'all don't like it, we're going to pick up our own ball and we're going to go home, and then we're going to play SEC games and they'll play Big 10 games. And at the end of the year, the SEC will play the Big 10, and the winner of that's the national championship, and the rest of y'all will just play in games no one cares about. Well, you could do that, and the SEC could do that, and the Big 10 could do that, and they would make a lot of money, and they would control the whole thing, and the whole big super conference college football world would be nothing but the SEC and the Big 10. But is that good for college football? Is it good to exclude the Atlantic coast? Is it good to exclude what's left of the West Coast? Is it good to exclude Florida State and Clemson and Miami and Oklahoma State and Kansas State and all of those schools, or Notre Dame even? I don't know that it is. I think I had a really smart guy tell me, it's not my quote, it's someone else's quote. I had a smart guy tell me, if college football is turned into a Southern sport, it's NASCAR. It doesn't need to be NASCAR. It needs to be the National Football League, Major League Baseball, the NBA. It needs to be that. It doesn't need to be regional, because that's not good for everyone. It's not even good for Alabama for it to be a regional sport. So I just think the SEC and Big 10, they have a lot of power, but with great power comes great responsibility. They have to save college football and not necessarily just say, hey, it's all about us.
Yeah. Okay. I hear you. At the same time, I think that's why the Big 10 has expanded into California and Oregon and Washington, because that sort of alleviates that issue. You know, that takes it away, because now you've got 4 teams out west that are involved, and they're the biggest teams. They're the most important. I mean, USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington are much more important than Stanford and Cal and
I agree.
Oregon State, whatever. So Yeah, and there's a big gap in there. There's a big part of the country that's not involved. I mean, I guess it goes from just about Nebraska to UCLA, right? I mean, Colorado is moderately involved only because of Deion Sanders at the moment. But anyway, and maybe my geography's off too. I'm not going to pretend that I have a globe in front of me or anything. I did major in cartography.
You did?
No, I didn't. I think as they told
I hope that was true. That was going to be worth a whole show.
As they told Buster Bluth on Arrested Development when he said he got his degree in cartography, they said, haven't they already kind of discovered everything? And he goes, well, he's like, yeah. Anyway, so I want to talk about some miscellaneous SEC talk and a few Alabama surprises. But got to tell you about FanDuel because it's the best. It always is. It's the #1 sports book in America, and it always will be. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on the FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats and view live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's guaranteed, by the way, when you place your first $5 bet. That's only at FanDuel.com. Where'd you think I was going to send you? Of course, it's FanDuel. It's right there. It's in the little thing that I put beneath our faces, our beautiful, beautiful faces. Okay, so couple of quick surprises. First of all, this is sort of random, but I'm kind of surprised, #1, that Graham Nicholson only has one field goal. He's one of two for the year.
One of two. Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of surprised that Jaheim Oatis for as big as he is, it feels like he's disappeared a little bit. And I don't know that it's his fault. That may be more about the scheme. And I'm surprised that Justice Haynes hadn't become more of a thing yet. I mean, first game, 85-yard touchdown. I thought, hey, here we go. And he just hadn't been used as much. And then I look back at the one play in the Georgia game this past weekend where he catches the little flare out. And as Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit both said, you got to get that first down. You've got to make that play.
Yeah, I really think it's a failure on his part. I thought it was a bad play by Justice Haynes. I'm not saying it was easy. Sometimes you just have to find a way. You had to find a way to
make a man miss. Very famously,
through it, or hey, and we're talking about Georgia. We're not talking about Bowling Green. I know they have incredible, just like Alabama has incredible athletes. So do they, and it's not easy to do. But I agree with you. That was a bad play. Just I thought in 4th and 1 earlier in the game that Jam Miller didn't make, that there was probably a yard somewhere up in the scrum. And he cut left, and once he cut left, he lost. The play was over once he made the decision to cut left instead of staying north-south. So those two have to improve and be a bigger part of things. And I do think the next 2 weeks, we'll talk more about Vanderbilt tomorrow's show, but I think the next 2 weeks, what I would tell DeBoer, and I hope he calls, is I think it's imperative that they get Jam and Justice a bigger part of things. And it doesn't have to be the same RPOs they've been running for 4 games. It just straight handoffs. Just make it look like Sundays. Just hand the ball to Justice and Jam or pitch it to them. Just straight up handoffs. Doesn't have to be the RPOs to bust them loose. I just want to see Jam and Justice involved more. But as far as the other ones, Nicholson's not kicking kicks because Alabama keeps scoring touchdowns, usually from long distance. It's not. It has nothing to do with the staff's confidence in him or Nicholson kicking or not kicking well. Alabama just keeps scoring touchdowns. They just haven't needed a kicker, which I guess is good, but you're going to need him at some point. So hopefully he gets some work in. Oatis, I think, is just, Alabama's got 2 interior defensive line spots. He can play the nose. He can play the defensive tackle spot. Those are the 2 spots he can play. But you got Tim Keenan and you got Tim Smith. You got James Smith, who's playing really well in his limited opportunities. Another guy who makes the most of his limited opportunities is Damon Payne, who made a nice stop on a 2-point conversion in the 4th quarter. So Oatis has almost turned into the 5th guy, which is a little surprising, but look who he's got to beat out to get snaps. So for now, my opinion is it's just hard to find snaps. You got 5 players vying for snaps in 2 positions. Someone's going to get left out. And for right now, that person's Oatis. But I still believe in him. I still think he's a good football player.
Me too.
And when these guys move on, Tim Smith will be moving on for sure. Maybe Keenan goes pro. Potentially, I think when it unclogs, I think we'll see Oatis really show out.
Then a couple other things SEC wise. I thought Hugh Freeze once again had some very eye-opening comments about Auburn, and I'm going to tell you, I mean, I feel like Georgia's going to put one on them this week. I think Georgia's going to come in upset. I think Auburn's sort of, flailing in the wind right now, like one of those giant inflatable things you see out in front of a used car lot. And Hugh Freeze's comments are mind-boggling to me. I mean, essentially saying, again, we should be 5-0. I mean, then I don't understand how you think that makes you look better. Yeah. And here's the other thing. I mean, people keep talking about how, well, he needs to get his guys in there. He has a lot of his guys in there. And they are playing teams that aren't as talented as they are, and they're playing them at home. And yeah, okay, I'm also a big proponent of quarterback can change everything. So then why are you still throwing the ball when clearly it was a run situation in several occasions this past weekend? I mean, the only thing you could do to help Oklahoma was give them a pick 6 because they couldn't get anything going. They had 2 big plays, and that was it. And those were, I mean, one of them was sort of a bust, and the other one, the receiver just beat his man, and a true freshman made a play. So be it. I don't know. I just feel like he's not even getting enough blame. And now it just, as fans tend to do, at first they're mad at him. Then they're like, well, let's wait and see. Then he makes these comments and everybody starts defending him, saying, well, he's just, instead of coach speak, he's speaking the truth. I don't know that he is speaking the truth. That's the thing. And so anyway, regardless, some other SEC thoughts. Tennessee and Arkansas this weekend on ABC. I don't know how that could be a trap game, I guess, but I don't see why this game isn't the exact replica of Tennessee, Oklahoma.
I would think it might even be more like Tennessee, NC State, frankly. I mean, yeah. I think Tennessee's going to whack Arkansas. I think so. I'm just curious. I'm curious enough to watch early just simply because Taylor Green is so athletic. He's so uniquely gifted. I think Taylor Green will make plays against anybody. I just don't know they don't make enough plays to keep Arkansas in the game. The SEC games I'm really interested in are Texas A&M versus Missouri and Ole Miss versus South Carolina, because as we sit here right now, Luke, those are 2 games. I don't want to pick a winner. I mean, I think either Missouri or A&M could win that game, and either Ole Miss or South Carolina may win that game. So that's what makes those games compelling to me. I think if you ask 10 football fans, hey, who wins those games? I think you're going to get 5 and 5 on either side on both of those games. So I'm looking forward to them.
Wouldn't you rather have either the Missouri A&M game or the Ole Miss at South Carolina game on ABC at night? Wouldn't you rather have that?
They're going to be better games, but maybe there's just more interest in Tennessee.
Yes,
sort of a top 5 team right now, and nobody's. Ole Miss fell out of the top 10. Missouri is sort of a faux top 10 team to me. But hey, if Missouri beats A&M and College Station, I'm back on the Missouri train.
I'm with you,
but I don't know that they will.
No, I'm with you, and I'll tell you something else. If South Carolina beats Ole Miss, now it's not as big a deal as it was prior to Kentucky beating Ole Miss in Oxford. But if South Carolina beats Ole Miss, man, I really hate the fact Alabama South Kakalaki is on at 11 o'clock the very next week.
Right. I mean, it turns into a bigger game for sure.
Yeah.
And they have some dudes that can match up. Let me tell you, I already said it even during Georgia week. South Carolina's outside pass rushers are better than what Georgia's got. I mean, they can get after the passer. That's a challenge for anybody. But, South Carolina beating Ole Miss now would be less of an upset. At home, less of an upset than what we saw in Oxford this past week with Kentucky. Kentucky, to me, beating Ole Miss in Oxford is a much bigger upset than what would happen if Ole Miss lost to South Carolina this weekend. And I said on yesterday's show, Luke, if Ole Miss loses this game, and now you're staring down the barrel of 4 or 5 losses for Ole Miss this season, I will preach the whole offseason about building a team out of the portal is dangerous. It is not the path to certain enlightenment. It can go the other way. Ask Florida State. They build their team like Ole Miss does. The rats are jumping off the ship there.
All right, that's going to do it for today's podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with more. Until then, roll tide, everybody.
Roll tide.